The coffee shop smelled like steamed milk and old books, the kind of place that felt like it had no rush except the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. I claimed a corner table by the window, the one that caught the morning sun just enough to warm my arms while I tapped at my laptop. A routine I had, typing slowly, watching people pass without really looking. She was already there when I got my coffee. Mid-40s, I guessed, her hair tucked behind one ear, a cardigan slightly wrinkled like she just rolled out of a busy morning. I'd seen her here before, reading with a thermos and a notebook, flipping pages like she was saving something just for herself. I didn't know her name. I didn't even know if I wanted to. "You're always early," she said, sliding into the chair across from me like she belonged there, though I wasn't sure she did. Yeah?" I said, fumbling my cup. "I like quiet." My words sounded small even to me. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes at first. Then it did, and it felt like the space between us was suddenly smaller. "Quiet's good," she said. "Mostly. Sometimes it's just lonely." I laughed a little, but I didn't say anything about my unsent texts sitting in my phone, the ones I wrote to no one in particular, the ones I'd never send. Instead, I watched her hands rest on the table, fingers brushing the edge of her notebook. I noticed the way her wedding ring caught the light for a second. A tiny detail I didn't need, but couldn't stop seeing. "So, the homework?" I said, trying to sound casual, holding the laptop up between us like a shield. "You think you could help me figure out this?" She leaned over just enough to close the laptop softly, a sound that made my chest tighten. "Forget the homework," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried somewhere deeper than I expected. "Let's just sit for a bit." I blinked. Paused. Not sure if I should protest or just sink into the silence she offered. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, something familiar and not overpowering, like cinnamon and rain. My hands rested on the table, too aware of my own fingers, the way I fidgeted with the corner of a napkin. She didn't rush, didn't explain, just let the moment stretch. We didn't talk much after that. We watched the street for a while, a shared quiet that wasn't awkward, just heavy with something neither of us named. I caught myself flicking my eyes toward her hands again, wondering what else she did with them when she wasn't closing laptops or pretending she didn't notice the sun hitting her hair. Before leaving, she wrote something on a scrap of paper and slid it toward me. I didn't read it right away, just traced the letters with my fingertip. Then she stood, packed her notebook, and left like it was just another morning, and maybe for her, it was. I opened the note. 4 words. "See me tomorrow?" And just like that, the quiet coffee shop felt like a different place entirely. I found myself back at the same table the next morning, the sunlight a little softer than yesterday, filtering through dust on the window. She was already there, humming softly as she poured tea into 2 mismatched cups. The faint clink of porcelain felt louder than it should, like it was meant just for me. "Morning," she said, sliding 1 cup across. I hesitated, fingers brushing hers for a second longer than necessary. She didn't flinch. "Morning," I murmured, surprised at the small rush in my chest. She stirred her tea slowly, eyes on the swirling liquid. "Used to do this with my dad," she said, almost in a whisper. "Every morning, hot tea, quiet, pretending the world could wait. He died 10 years ago." I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened. I nodded, because that felt safer than saying anything else. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible smile, and I realized how much weight a smile could carry. We sipped our tea in silence. I caught myself imagining how it would feel if this quietness stretched into something more permanent, something forbidden. She wasn't single in the conventional sense. Divorced, yes, but with adult kids and routines I could never fully understand. And me. I was 20, fumbling through my own routines, a little lost, a little desperate for connection I hadn't even admitted out loud. When I opened my laptop to show her the problem I'd been stuck on, she leaned in just enough to read over my shoulder. My arm brushed hers. I didn't pull away. Instead, I noticed how close we were in that small space, how ordinary and impossible it felt all at once. You're really thorough, she said quietly. I mean, in a good way. Makes me want to double-check everything I do. Her eyes flicked up at me, catching me off guard. A small joke, maybe? A test, maybe? I wanted to laugh, but it came out quieter than intended. I try, I said, looking down at the screen, though I wasn't paying much attention. For a moment, she just sat there, hands wrapped around her cup, as if deciding whether to say more. Then she reached across and adjusted the sleeve of my cardigan, tucking it slightly so it wouldn't bunch at my wrist. A gesture so casual it could have gone unnoticed, but my heart betrayed me, speeding up at the touch. You're different, she said finally, almost to herself. Then softer. Different in a way that's hard to explain. I didn't know how to answer, so I said nothing. Instead, I traced the edge of the table with my fingertip, catching glimpses of her in the corner of my eye. She was watching me too, and the silence carried more than words ever could. When she finally stood to leave, she paused by the door. Don't stay away too long, she said, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. It wasn't teasing, exactly. More like a promise. And when our eyes met, I felt the weight of something unspoken stretch across the space between us, something fragile, dangerous, and entirely magnetic. The library smelled like old paper and polished wood, sunlight slanting in thin bars across the table. I sat across from her, pretending to read, but mostly watching the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, how her pen hovered just above the notebook before writing. I don't know if this is helping, I said, forcing my voice casual, though my hands were curling slightly around the pen. She didn't look up. It's fine, she murmured, tone light, but I could hear the hesitation. The pause stretched. I wanted to reach out, to say something, anything, but the words stuck in my throat. A shadow passed over the table. One of my friends from class walked in, waving. I froze. She lowered her gaze quickly, closing the notebook a fraction too fast, as if the casual observer shouldn't see what was happening here. When the friend left, I exhaled. She didn't. She just sat there, sipping her coffee, fingers tracing the rim of the cup. Something unspoken hung between us, a line we hadn't crossed, but maybe could. You always work this late? I asked, trying to fill the space with ordinary words. Not usually, she said, then paused. But sometimes, yes. Her voice was soft, careful. She leaned forward slightly, eyes catching mine for a moment longer than needed. I caught the hint of a smile, hesitant, almost guilty. My heart thumped, and I realized I'd been holding my breath, waiting for her next move. She moved closer, reaching to adjust a stray page on my notebook. My arm brushed hers. I didn't pull away this time. Instead, I froze, aware of the warmth, the impossibility, the risk. The silence stretched. I imagined leaning in, just a fraction closer, just enough to feel the curve of her cheek, the scent of her hair. My fingers twitched. My mind spun in quiet fragments. Should I? Could I? Would she? Her eyes flicked down, then back to mine. I could see the flicker of something, hesitation, restraint, maybe curiosity. I wanted to say something, to break the spell, but the words fell flat before leaving my mouth. The bell above the door jingled, making both of us jump slightly. She straightened, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and leaned back just enough to break the tension. And then, in that moment before she left, our hands brushed again, lingering a second too long. I caught myself imagining what might have happened if she hadn't moved away, if our quiet, ordinary world had bent just a little, if the line between teacher and student, friend and something else, had blurred for one breath. She packed her things slowly, carefully, as if measuring every movement against some unspoken rule. And when she finally looked up at me, her gaze lingered, soft and sharp at the same time. I wanted to reach across the table. I almost did. But instead, I just watched her walk out, leaving the notebook open, the pen untouched, the space between us full of nearly their confessions. We walked along the river path, the sun low, making the water glint like tiny flames. Leaves rustled under our feet. I tried to keep my hands in my pockets, but my fingers kept brushing the edge of hers as we walked side by side. "You ever think about what you're doing?" she asked suddenly, voice quiet, almost swallowed by the wind. I froze. Didn't know if she meant the homework, the walk, or me. "Do you mean here?" I said, words trailing. She stopped, turning slightly so the sunlight caught her face. "I mean this." She gestured vaguely, not at the river, not at the trees, not at the benches, but at the space between us. The space I'd been aching to cross but had been too careful to touch. I swallowed. "I don't know." Truth was, I didn't know more than I should. My heart thudded. I imagined every step forward and back, every hand brushed and missed glance. The risk, the age difference, the unspoken rules. All of it. She exhaled, like she'd been holding it in a long time. "I'm not supposed to feel this," she whispered. Her eyes found mine, searching, pleading, or maybe just seeing. I wanted to tell her it was the same for me, that every quiet morning, every shared cup of tea, every notebook page had been a tether to her. But the words got caught somewhere behind my ribs. We continued walking, slower now, either of us saying much. The world felt smaller somehow, like it was bending around the tension, holding its breath with us. I noticed the subtle ways she moved, how her shoulder brushed mine, the slight tilt of her head when she laughed softly at a joke only half told, how her hand lingered near the edge of mine, waiting for me to make the first move. And then, almost without warning, she paused at a wooden bench. Saturday. I stayed standing, unsure if I was intruding. She looked at the water, then back at me. "You make it hard to think clearly," she said. Not a complaint. Not a question. Just a confession. My stomach tightened. I don't want to mess things up," I said, words rushed and awkward. Her gaze softened. She didn't answer. She just reached over, brushing her fingers lightly against mine. I felt heat where skin barely touched. And then she leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing as if measuring every possibility. Her voice dropped, tentative. "Do you ever imagine what it would be like if we didn't have to stop?" The words hung in the air, unfinished, fragile. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my hands itching to close the distance, to cross that invisible line we both feared and wanted. I opened my mouth to answer, but the wind caught the edges of my thoughts. She tilted her head, waiting, and I realized that whatever I said, or didn't say, would change everything. And for a second, just a flicker, I thought we might. The next morning, the coffee shop felt different. The corner table, the sunlight, even the scent of steamed milk, but she wasn't there. I waited longer than usual, checking my phone every few seconds. No message. No note. Just empty chairs and the low hum of early chatter. I went through the motions anyway. Ordered the usual, opened my laptop, typed half a sentence before deleting it. My fingers hovered over the screen, paused on unsent texts I'd drafted but never sent, messages that now felt heavier than words could carry. When she finally arrived, she didn't smile. Not like she used to. Not at all. Her eyes avoided mine, fixed on something beyond the window. I wanted to ask if she was okay, if I'd done something wrong, but my voice got stuck somewhere in the morning air. She sat across from me, distant. "Busy morning," she said, voice clipped. Not sharp, not angry. Just distant. I nodded, trying to pretend it didn't hurt, but I noticed everything. The way her coffee sat untouched for longer than usual, the way her fingers traced patterns on the napkin without really folding it, the way she glanced at the door every few seconds, as if she were waiting for someone else. I didn't expect you to come here," I said finally, words flat. "I thought I needed some space," she admitted, still not meeting my eyes. Her voice trembled slightly, though just enough for me to hear it if I wanted to. Space. A single word that felt like a wall between us, and I realized how much I'd been holding my breath, hoping she'd lean in, hoping she'd stay. But she didn't. We sat in silence. I imagined 100 conversations we could have had. I imagined her telling me about an ex who still called, or a child she hadn't mentioned, or just life, tangled and impossible. Every scenario flickered and vanished like smoke. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to close the distance with words or touch. But the space between us had grown overnight, invisible yet impossible to ignore. I packed up my laptop, pretending I had work to do, pretending my heart didn't ache at the empty air beside her. She left before I could speak again, glancing briefly at me, something like guilt or apology in her eyes, then gone. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. Later, I found the note she left behind. 4 words crossed out in a shaky hand. I didn't touch it. Didn't read it fully. Just left it where it was, a quiet monument to what could have been. The chair remained empty. The coffee cooled. My hands hovered over the laptop again, and the unsent messages stared back at me, longer than they ever had before. And I wondered if she would ever return, or if this pause was the only thing she'd leave behind. The rain started just as I reached her doorstep. I didn't have an umbrella. My coat was soaked halfway through, sleeves heavy and cold, but I didn't care. She opened the door, her hair damp at the ends, cardigan clinging in ways that made her look fragile, real, human. We stood there for a long beat, either speaking. I wanted to say everything, wanted to spill the words I'd held in for weeks, months even, but the first step felt impossible. She shifted her weight, hands folded loosely, eyes fixed somewhere between my face and the street. "I didn't know if I should come," I said finally, voice small. "Good," she whispered. Then paused. "Or bad?" Her shoulders hunched just slightly, a small human tremor that told me more than words ever could. The rain drummed on the roof above us, a steady background to the quiet that had grown between us. I imagined walking away, leaving it all suspended like it had been the last few days, letting the pause continue indefinitely. But I didn't. She stepped aside, gesturing me in. Kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and something baked earlier in the day. Ordinary. Safe. I closed the door behind me and hung my coat, heart still thudding as I realized how ordinary this room felt, and how dangerous it was too. "I thought maybe we should just talk," I said, words stumbling over each other. She leaned against the counter, gaze fixed on the chipped edge of the sink. "Talk about what?" she asked softly. "Us," I said finally. The words sounded heavy, real. My hands itched to reach for hers, to anchor myself to the moment, but I left them hovering instead. Her fingers twitched, brushing the counter almost by accident, and I caught the small movement. I don't want to hurt you," she said quietly. Pause. "But I don't want to lie either." I nodded, understanding that the weight of truth was often heavier than the weight of silence. "I don't care about easy. I just want honest." Her eyes met mine then, long enough that the rain, the kitchen, the small apartment all fell away. A small, careful exhale, a twitch of a smile, not full, not triumphant, but enough. Enough to mean we were both here, fragile, risking. "I guess, okay," she said finally. Voice soft. Almost casual, almost nothing. But it carried everything. I smiled back, small and slow. Didn't reach for her, didn't press. Just stayed, just existed in the space that had felt impossible, until now. And for a moment, that was everything. The rain pattered on. The kettle whistled faintly. The world outside continued, indifferent. But inside, in that quiet kitchen, something fragile had shifted. And it was enough. Weeks had passed since the rain-soaked night in her kitchen. The mornings were cooler now, sunlight sharper through the coffee shop window, the corner table waiting for us like it always had. She arrived first, as usual, carrying her thermos and notebook, hair slightly windblown from the walk. I settled across from her, black coffee in hand, fingers brushing the warm cup. We didn't speak right away. The quiet had become familiar, comfortable. I noticed the small details again, the faint scar along her knuckle, the tilt of her head when she read, the way she wrapped her hands around the mug as if holding the warmth in her palms could hold everything else at bay. "You're late," she said lightly, almost teasing, though her eyes softened when they met mine. "I got distracted." I said, shrugging. Not really lying. The world outside seemed slower, quieter, like it finally allowed us to exist without rushing. We shared the tea, laughing softly at small, forgotten jokes. Nothing dramatic. No confessions needed. Just two people who had learned to exist in the spaces between words. I remembered the bench by the river, the rain, the pauses that had carried more than conversations ever could. Some mornings she still arrived early. Some mornings I did. Some days we met at the library instead, or walked through the same park where we'd almost crossed lines. Time had passed, and the edges of tension had softened. What remained was simple presence. One Tuesday, at exactly 8:47 a.m., I noticed her watching me sip my coffee, eyes catching mine with a small flicker of amusement. I smiled back, careful, deliberate, knowing that all the pauses, all the near misses, had led to this, a quiet, earned rhythm that no one else needed to understand. I like this, she said finally, voice soft, as if saying too much might shatter the moment. Just ordinary mornings, small rituals, the faint clatter of cups, the rustle of pages, these were the things that held weight now. The quiet intimacy, the little gestures, the way she reached over sometimes to fix a loose sleeve, the way I noticed without needing to say anything, it was enough. Walking back from the coffee shop, I held the door open for her, and she passed through with a small, knowing smile. A shared glance, a subtle brush of our fingers, and the world outside didn't matter. The bench by the river still waited, the thermos still steamed, and the unspoken understanding between us hummed quietly, like a song that only we could hear. Life wasn't perfect. It was warm, awkward, tender. And for the first time in a long time, I felt steady. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?